looking to unwind on the far outside, then to the inside right and just as they come for home. Star in My Dreams from Obesos and Run Classic. They come down toward this final furlong. It's Hot Rod Charlie and Midnight Bourbon needs to lift. Hot Rod Charlie finding for Joel Rosario. They come past the 16th. Hot Rod Charlie just holds Midnight Bourbon, and rattling home is Obesos. It's Hot Rod Charlie to win the TwinSpires.com Louisiana Derby. Second photo.
Welcome back to another edition of the Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster. In this edition, we will be previewing the Grade 1 Haskell, one of the premier races of this summer, especially for the 3-year-olds. Every year, it's a big race won by so many talented horses over the years. Obviously, American Pharoah comes to mind, Triple Crown champ making his next start in here. And then, we've seen so many horses use this race as the continuation of a great 3-year-old campaign or the beginning of a promising second half of the year. Nevertheless, we're going to have a lot of answers coming out of this race. We have all three runner-ups, as things stand right now, I should say, all three runner-ups from each Triple Crown race: Mandaloun, Hot Rod Charlie, and Midnight Bourbon all in here. Mandaloun, of course, still pending. He could be named the Kentucky Derby winner at some point in time. For now, he is the runner-up, but nevertheless, an extremely good, compact group of 7, and then a couple new risers coming into the fray that might be able to blossom. So we'll start with the one following C. That is the most notable of those new shooters. He makes his graded stakes debut. Only 3 starts, his last 2 very impressive wins. And honestly, his only loss, he kind of beat himself. He could have won it, but he was kind of all over the place. And even in that spot, he crossed the line second behind Defunded, who himself a graded stakes performer this year. Then he was disqualified, placed 3rd, but 2 wins since then by combined 12 lengths, especially last time out, finished in front of the likes of Reinvestment Risk, in just a very strong allowance win at Belmont. Now he steps up into deeper waters, makes his first start around 2 turns, first start beyond 6.5 furlongs, going 1 1/8 here. So yeah, questions to answer. I think a lot of people might look at that pedigree, being by Run Happy out of a Speightstown mare, think, he probably isn't going to last the distance, but what we've really learned from Run Happy in his short time at stud is his offspring have really, enjoyed longer distances when they're, physically built for it. They're adaptable, I should say. That he's had some quick sprinters, and he's had some horses that can win up to 1.25 miles. We've seen on occasion. He had a horse win on Kentucky Derby week going 1.25 miles. So the distance versatility is there, and this horse seems like, well, as he's very quick, he might have that high cruising speed. That'll take him a 2 turn, 1.125 miles. Physically reminds me a lot of a horse like a Bayern or a Life is Good, a horse who is just so fast that they can take themselves 2 turns, even though their pedigree might not indicate that's what suits them. So he has that going for him. But now, of course, I imagine Todd Fletcher was hoping for something slightly easier. Now he has to face Hot Rod Charlie, Mandaloun, Midnight Bourbon. It doesn't get much tougher than that. Only Essential Quality truly would have made this field tougher. So it'll be interesting nonetheless to see how he handles that. He will be the speed of this race as he breaks from the rail. That's going to be something he's going to have to deal with. And his hand is forced since he drew. If he drew the 3 or 4, they could have had their choice. Do we want to sit just off the pace, or do we want to go? Now that he's stretching out for the first time, 2 turns out of 3 straight sprints, and he drew the rail, he's going to have to send. So how quick he's going to go is going to be interesting. We'll talk about that more in a second. The 2 is Anti-Gravity, one of a couple long shots in here. There's really 3 horses in here that don't seem like they have too big of a chance, but of those horses, Anti-Gravity probably has the best chance. Back-to-back wins, both at Monmouth, after losing his first 10 career races. But it's not like he was running bad races. In fact, there's only one of those starts where he finished worse than 4th. So he while he was always running consistent races, wasn't getting the job done until he got to Monmouth. Back-to-back wins, going 2 turns, including an allowance win last time out. Both of his wins have been against elders. They've both been pretty impressive visually, in my opinion. Now he does, first career graded stakes start, much deeper waters than ever. He'll have to improve immensely, but you obviously do have to enjoy that. He has local experience. He knows this track very well. He's not lost on it yet. So he does have that going for him for Jerry Hollendorfer, who's, shifted his, what stock he has left to the Northeast, to Monmouth, as he continues to deal with all the drama that has ensued over the last few years. Interesting to see him pop up in a big race. We haven't seen his name officially listed on a horse in a race of this caliber in quite a while. So that very a horse, you don't really consider it much as a win contender, but if you're looking for some value outside of those top four horses in here, this might be one to look at as a potential horse to finish out the Placer show. The 3 is Mandaloun, obviously a horse who's sitting in a very pretty position, as he very well could be named the Kentucky Derby winner in the near future, depending on what the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission does rule on the Medina Spirit Bob Baffert case. Mandaloun, his one start since then was a win in the Pegasus, where on paper probably not the most impressive, but at the same time had to work really hard. He steadied at the start. He had to come from last, something he'd not done before. He's not a horse that needs to be up real close to the pace, but he does prefer to be in a stalking position, and that's not what he was able to do in the Pegasus. But he still, nevertheless, was able to rally under Florent Giroux and get the job done, beating Weyburn, a graded stakes winner, easily one of the better 3-year-olds in this crop right now, a horse who, depending on how things go, could be running in the Travers or favored for a race like the Queen's Plate down the road. And then the horse in third, Dr. Jack, another talented horse from the Todd Pletcher barn, who could be favored coming up a few weeks from now it's 2 weeks from now in a stakes race at Saratoga. So Mandaloun beat good horses in there, and of course his Derby prep season finished in front of Proxy and Midnight Bourbon, and his win in the Risen Star, flopped in the Louisiana Derby, Kentucky Derby, only loses to Medina Spirit, who, whatever the situation is there, however you view that, however the rulings will go, nevertheless ran such a credible race in the Kentucky Derby. So, this race is right there for him for the taking. He's got a win on the surface under his belt. 1.125 is a distance that he's only ran out once, but he excelled at, and I think is a very good distance for him. So he's got positives, absolutely no shock there. But there are questions. Is he how does he rank among those top 3 horses in this race? Is he really better than a Hot Rod Charlie or a Midnight Bourbon? Midnight Bourbon has gotten the better measure of Mandaloun on 2 occasions at Fairgrounds, Lecomte, and the Louisiana Derby. So there are certain things you have to weigh. In my opinion, I do think he is the third best of those horses. I could see how anybody else could view that differently. The 4 is your morning line favorite, Hot Rod Charlie, probably the most fun 3-year-old on this, among this crop. Even though he hasn't really won anything of note other than the Louisiana Derby, but he's a hard trier and he's very fun to watch. Placed in both the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont, ran such a gritty race in the Belmont. I guarantee I saw more tweets about how valiant Hot Rod Charlie was in defeat in the Belmont Stakes rather than Essential Quality's win, which I think is funny, but I think the praise is fair because he was really gritty that day. Kentucky Derby, he had trouble throughout the race. He didn't get the position he wanted, still was third, beating a length. So back-to-back incredible runs. But he still has questions to answer because we haven't seen him win a premier race. Sure, that Louisiana Derby win was very impressive, but he's been beaten before. Now by good horses, absolutely. Medina Spirit, Essential Quality, but there's still, a step he needs to take to cement himself as, one of the top 2 3-year-olds in the crop. I think there's no doubt that Essential Quality is number 1 among these 3-year-olds, but Hot Rod Charlie needs to use this race to cement himself as that number 2 horse for now because, there's still questions that need to be answered, even though he's been very good and very consistent. Best part about this horse, he's adaptable. He can win on the lead. He can run strong races from off the pace. So really, Fabian Pratt's going to be able to do whatever he wants with this horse and try and get a win out of him. Takes the blinkers off for the first time. Don't really know why. Haven't seen anything in any articles or something like that indicating why that's the case. But I'm sure Doug O'Neill has something in mind for him, and he's ran well without him before. So they're trained well without him. He hasn't really had a good race without them, but he's trained well without him before. So certainly Doug O'Neill knows what he's doing on that front. So that's not something I'm worried about. Certainly a top contender in this race. It's just a question. Can he really cement himself among the top 2 in this division? 5, another long shot, Picking Time. Not much to say about him. He is a graded stakes winner. Took out the grade 3 Nashua last November at Aqueduct, but since then 3 very, very poor efforts, as in he's been beaten a combined 40 lengths in his last 3 races. Hasn't been beyond a mile in all but 1 start. That was a very poor performance in the Remsen. Comes out of a last place finish in the Jersey Derby, which was taken off the turf in late May. He's got 3 bullet works coming into this race. So if you're a real work tab handicapper, then I guess that's something you can look at. But that's really the extent. Not much going behind Picking Time. The 6, is Midnight Bourbon. Of course, the Preakness runner-up, where he was heavily bet that day. Everybody knew the kind of trouble he endured in the Kentucky Derby. Just wasn't, I mean, I shouldn't say trouble. A lack of assertiveness on the part of the jockey in that race got him beat. He was not where he wanted to be early on in that race, and it is the reason he was only able to muster up a 6. But it was a decent 6 because we saw him pass horses, which was something we hadn't really seen before. A comment I've always had about this horse, if you look at his running lines, he's just consistent throughout every race he runs. If he's going to set up shop on the lead, he's going to take him wide wire. If he's going to set up shop just off the leader, he might make the lead for a small portion, but he's going to finish second or third. He's not a horse that seems to really like to pass horses, and he doesn't like getting passed. So certain things like that. The Preakness kind of the same. There are a lot of 2s in that running line. Of course, he made the lead at one point in the stretch, but was ultimately run down by Rombauer. So that'll be interesting to see how Paco Lopez decides to handle that. And in his first time aboard this horse, he's a horse that you can almost guarantee he's going to hit the board. It's all he does. He's never, ran a bad race in his career, even in his 6th place finish in the Kentucky Derby. So, you got to either consider him as your win contender or your place contender. And I don't think there's any other way about it with Midnight Bourbon. He's just ultra consistent. The question is race tactics and how aggressive Paco Lopez wants to be early on. I highly doubt anyone's going to outrun following seat of the lead, but how close do you want to be to him? How much do you want to force him to set a quick pace in order to soften him up, but as will also, give your horse a chance to win the race. So it's going to be a tough balancing act for Paco Lopez, in my opinion, but Midnight Bourbon, such a gritty, hard-trying horse, he should be able to handle it just fine. Finally, the 7, another local horse, another local long shot. That's Basso for Greg Sacco. Broke his maiden at Monmouth on debut last August. It was an 8-length score, but has yet to win since then. 0 for 4. Hasn't finished better than 3rd in any of those. Most recently was 6th in a 9-horse field, beaten over 9 lengths by Anti-Gravity in an allowance race. Hasn't really had many excuses either. So just plenty of questions and answers. Only had one start this year. It'd be a shock if he won. He's heavily overmatched in here. So my pick in this year's Haskell is going to be the morning line favorite, likely post time favorite, Hot Rod Charlie. Just think he's, showing so much, only lost to good horses. Even through all the trouble he's endured in a couple of his starts this year in the Kentucky Derby, not getting the most ideal trip. Bob Lewis, where he was third, only beaten the length despite being out of position. He's just such a hard trier. He loves to find ways to run big races and try and win. So Hot Rod Charlie for me in this spot, and I do think Midnight Bourbon is a horse that is also going to run somewhere second or third. He'll be right there. And I do think, though, maybe, if you want to find any kind of value in this race, and it's not very confident, I think this is a rather formful edition of the Travers, but Anti-Gravity, 2 wins in a row over the track. Obviously, this is the deepest waters he'll face that any of these horses will really have faced other than those that ran in the Kentucky Derby. But he's got great local form. He's been visually impressive. He's clearly improved because he lost his first 10 races and has now put together back-to-back wins. So the light bulb is clearly turned on to some effect. Don't think he can win, but he could be one that maybe picks up the pieces late, picks up rounds out a trifecta or something like that. If you're looking for value at all. That being said, I don't think there's much value to be found in this year's Haskell. That's all I have for you guys on this preview. We'll see you next time on the Racing Rundown.
An Arabian Prince. They straighten past the quarter pole. Top of the stretch, 3/4. 1 minute 13.57 seconds. Against the rail, it's Midnight Bourbon. Midnight Bourbon leads them into the final furlong. Leads by 3. Mandaloun and Proxy, they battle it out. It's still Midnight Bourbon. Past the 16th. Midnight Bourbon, Proxy, Mandaloun gamely. Here it is for Midnight Bourbon. Wins Lecomte, holds Proxy and Mandaloun.